Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account. Chapter 6, Rising Darkness. Third Age, 2683, 328 years ago. Rain poured down from the sky in watery sheets, drenching the forests of Mirkwood below. Legolas trudged doggedly on through the mud, grimacing as wetness seeped through his boots and clothes. He should have found shelter hours ago, when the dark clouds appeared on the horizon, but had been distracted by an orc patrol. Instead of leaving them for a later time, Legolas had tracked and killed the orcs. Now he was paying the price, stuck out in the rain as he tried to make his way to more suitable shelter. Legolas moved along at a slow pace, grumbling softly to himself as he walked through the relentless mud. Elves could walk on snow, but mud? They sunk in mud like everyone else. It was decidedly irritating. The assassin would have preferred running through the treetops, but the wood was too slick and even he might fall from the tree's limbs. The trees around him were unhappy they could not trust themselves to carry him, so they did their best to shield him from as much of the rain as they could. Their efforts helped a little, but Legolas was still drenched. The assassin had a feeling that the Valar were laughing at him right now. With a huff, he pulled his cloak, at least it was somewhat waterproof, tighter around his shoulders, determined to make it through the relentless rain. Had the ocean decided to fall from the sky? A soft sound caught Legolas's attention, and he paused in his trek, glancing around. Seeing nothing, he tipped his head, listening intently. There it was again. A whimper? The elf followed the noise to a tree with risen roots, a small space open between its trunk and the ground. He knelt to the ground, ignoring the mud, and found himself looking at a tiny red-furred shape, a fox kit. The little animal shivered beneath the tree roots, staring at Legolas with wide, scared eyes. Its fur was sopping wet, and violent shudders revealed that it was freezing. The assassin's violet eyes softened, and he sat in front of the tree roots, murmuring to the kit. "Hello, little one," he said in Sindarin. "Are you cold?" The fox kit snuffled and tipped its head, stepping forward cautiously. Legolas waited patiently as the tiny animal moved slowly towards him, finally halting in front of his knees. The kit whined, nudging his arm, and the assassin picked it up, cradling him, in his arms. Even though the outside of Legolas's cloak was wet, the inside was dry, and the fox kit warmed quickly in his arms. "Did your home flood, little one?" the elf murmured to the little animal. The fox kit whined again, and snuggled deeper into the warmth of his arms. Legolas's lips twitched in amusement as the small, fluffy tail wagged in content. He stood, the kit still in his arms and beneath his cloak, and continued walking towards shelter. Shelter was a mass of giant overlapping trees, some of the biggest in Mirkwood. These trees were not quite shadowed, and the elves could still hear their voices, though they were becoming more distant and quiet to normal elves' ears. Their branches and leaves were so wide and had so many layers that the ground and limbs under a few levels were completely dry. Legolas could climb almost to the tops of these trees and not get wet. Also, they were in the more remote part of Mirkwood, where not even the elves usually tread. The river ran along the southern side, rapids forming a barrier between him and the darkened lands. He would be safe here. The fox kit still in his arms, Legolas leapt up onto the lowest branch, climbing nimbly up a tree. Not a leaf rustled as he made his ascent, pausing high enough that if someone did happen to pass under the tree, they would not see him. Even though the tree knew this, it shifted its branches to better hide Legolas from below. "Thank you, my friend," Legolas told the tree. It silently touched his shoulder in response, choosing not to respond verbally. Legolas hung his cloak over another branch before laying down. The fox kit made himself comfortable on the elf's chest, and both quickly fell asleep. The sound of rushing water woke Legolas. He sat up and saw the fox kit was standing on the edge of a branch, hackles raised. The elf peered down at the ground and gasped, staring mutely at what he saw. The river was swollen and raging, water thrashing and beating against the trees with an anger only nature could conjure. The water frothed a sickly brown as mud, dirt, and twigs were caught up in the flood, zooming downstream with terrifying speed. Legolas knew he was safe up in the treetops, and dearly hoped no one was down on the forest floor. He picked up the fox kit, who was still alarmed, and stroked his back soothingly. The kit slowly calmed down, eyes closing as he prepared to fall asleep again. A sudden sense of unease snapped both of them awake. Legolas recognized the sickening, uneasy feeling he felt immediately. Orcs. The elf's violet eyes raked the forest floor and surrounding foliage, scanning the area for the creatures. Leaves rustled and he tensed, a confused frown crossing his face. Whatever was there was not an orc. A second later, 5 elves, 4 males, 1 female, burst out from the foliage, one supporting another. They scurried along the edge of the flooded river, racing towards the trees. "Up, into the trees," one shouted, leaping up into the boughs of a spruce. 2 others quickly followed suit, leaving the injured one and his companion on the ground. "You have to jump," the uninjured one was saying. The other elf, he had long reddish-brown hair, lifted his head weakly before saying, "Can't." "Yes, you can," the silver-haired companion said stubbornly. "Thimbin, help me." The called elf leapt back down, glancing nervously into the surrounding forest. "Fail, they're coming." "I know," the silver-haired elf Fail snapped. "Grab his other arm." Thimbin did as he was told, and together the 3 leapt, landing clumsily on the tree limb as the reddish-brown-haired elf passed out. Fail gently lowered his companion onto the limb, glaring at the surrounding trees. "Bows," he commanded, and the other 3 conscious elves drew their weapons. Higher in the treetops, Legolas drew his own bow, narrowing his eyes. He could see the orcs coming towards them, his eyes easily able to see them in the dark. The elves below him were tense, arrows notched as they waited for their enemies to emerge. Fail shot first, his arrow hitting the lead orc in the shoulder. The creature howled and fell, his kin trampling him as they raced into the open. 5 arrows flew straight and true, but none of the Mirkwood elves noticed the extra shot, too intent on their own targets. The orcs kept flooding in. This was far larger than a patrol, and soon were firing back up at the visible elves. Below Legolas, Fail was forced to duck as an arrow slammed into the trunk beside him. Only Legolas heard the trees gasp of pain. As one, the elves began to target the enemy archers, picking them off as quickly as they could. "I'm out of arrows," a blonde-haired elf reported. A second later, Thimbin said, "As am I." "We need to get out of here," Fail growled. "We can't carry Lane through the treetops," the last elf, she had black hair, pointed out as she shot another orc. "We're going to have to try," Fail said grimly. "Cover us." The black-haired female and blonde-haired male nodded, shooting sparingly at the orcs that were trying to climb the trees. Legolas watched worriedly as Thimbin and Fail lifted Lane between them. He hesitated, crouching as he wondered if he should go down and help. He knew the forest even better than its inhabitants, maybe he could... A shrill battle cry interrupted his thoughts, and a mass of elves emerged from the forest, attacking the orcs from behind. The elves perched below Legolas relaxed. "Thank the valor," Helid breathed. The larger patrol of elves made quick work of the remaining orcs. Legolas watched as their leader, a silver gold-haired elf, walked to the base of the tree, glancing up at those they had rescued. "Are you all right, Fail?" he called. "I'm fine, Megalag," Fail responded, "but Lane is injured." A glance at the red-brown-haired elf revealed he was conscious but dazed. "Bring him down," Megalag called. "Carefully now." Legolas unconsciously held his breath as the injured elf and his companions descended, their perch unnervingly close to the swollen river. The hidden elf could feel the tree's tension as it prepared to catch them if they fell. He laid a hand on the oak's tree, muscles tense as the elves grew closer to the ground. He breathed again as first Euil, then Helid, then Thimben all made it to the ground. Fail carefully handed his injured warrior to Megaleg, balancing carefully on the tree limb. Movement out of the corner of Legolas's eye made him turn, and his eyes widened as an orc rose up behind Megaleg. Thimben saw it at the same time as he did. "Look out!" the blonde-haired elf yelled. Startled, Megaleg jerked around to see the orc rising above him, dagger poised to stab down. As abrupt as a blink, an arrow was through the monster's throat. Megaleg spun back towards the tree, looking for the source of the arrow. There was no one to be seen. The tree was empty. This slowly registered in the prince's mind, and his eyes widened, staring at the raging river. The river that passed beneath the branch Fail had been standing on. "Fail!" he screamed. Everything happened so fast. One moment, Fail was reaching for his brother's hand. The next, he had jerked back and plunged into the river, startled by the orc. The elf thrashed in the water, unable to tell which way was up as he was pulled ruthlessly downstream. All he could see was murky darkness, the brownish water obscuring his vision. He slammed into something, pain exploding in his shoulder as his fingers tingled and went numb. The water was cold, colder than anything he had felt before. He could feel his limbs becoming sluggish as the chill sapped his strength. Fail's lungs felt like they were about to burst, his lack of air making his already hindered vision grow darker. He hit another hard object, a rock, and the air was forced from his lungs, water rushing in. The prince choked and gasped, more water entering his air-deprived body. He could not move his limbs anymore. He could not even feel them. The blackness was creeping in, overwhelming him, and he stopped struggling, limp as the raging water carried him. He was tired. So tired. He could not fight anymore. Why should he fight? Why should he struggle to survive against odds he could not defeat? Fail could hear his heart pounding loudly in his chest, the beat slowing. He could feel the blackness taking him. Maybe he should let it. If he did, he would see his mother and Legolas again. Fail blinked, eyes forcing themselves open after a long pause. The shadows were overcoming him. He could not see any more. Then, the prince saw a light. It was a small speck, slowly growing bigger as he watched it. Intrigued, Fail reached for the light, hand drifting slowly through the water. The light was getting brighter, closer, and the silver-haired elf could see a figure in its midst. The figure floated towards him, face hidden by the light that surrounded him and was him. For a moment, Fail swore that he spotted a flash of pale blonde hair. He smiled to himself. Legolas. He could not clearly see him, but the silver-haired prince knew it was his brother. The elf reached for his brother's hand, warmth flooding through him as his younger brother took his hand. Legolas was so warm, nice and safe and warm. And then they were moving through the water, the light and blackness becoming a blur. Safe with his brother, more content than he had ever been, Fael let the light fade and allowed the blackness to take him. Legolas burst out from the water, gasping as his head met the open air. He held the unconscious Fael more securely in his arms and swam with the raging current, only resisting enough to keep their heads above water. Most people would have tried to struggle towards the shore, but Legolas waited patiently, allowing the current to carry him and his companion down the river. Struggling would only tire himself out, and the elf knew that an opportunity for a quick escape would show itself. There, a shadowed tree stood on the bank with limbs hanging over the river. "Help me, friend," Legolas called. The tree shifted, reacting to his voice, only to cringe away as it sensed the too bright elf Dalis carried. The tree was approaching fast, the opportunity for safety soon to be out of reach. "I know his aura hurts, but please, help," Legolas cried, his burden growing heavier. The tree tensed, mustering its strength of will, and let its limbs droop over the river. Swiftly, Legolas reached up and grabbed the limb, the water pulling at him and Fael. Shaking from the close proximity of the too bright elf, the tree lifted them both out of the water. The assassin could sense its pain. Though it was not touching the too bright elf, Fael's presence still burned. Despite this, the tree managed to set them gently on safe ground. Once that was done, the tree shuddered and curled in on itself, echoes of pain ripping through it. Legolas touched its trunk gently. "Thank you," he said aloud. The tree's limb brushed against his shoulder before going still. Legolas turned to Fael, checking the other elf's pulse. It was weak and fluttery, but still there. Frowning, the assassin bit his lip. Fael had a lot of water in his lungs. If he did not get it out, the silver-haired elf would drown soon. A small yip interrupted the assassin's frantic thoughts, and he turned to see the fox kit scurrying towards him. "How did you get here?" the elf murmured vaguely, focusing on his patient. The tiny animal yipped again, this time louder, before letting loose a short bark. "Kurama, there you are," a voice called, startling Legolas. He was on his feet in an instant in front of Fael, one of his knives clutched in his hand with the fox kit held protectively to his chest. Before him was an old man in brown robes. The moment Legolas set eyes upon him, he knew the newcomer was eccentric. His hair was a wild, bushy mess, with twigs and bird droppings matted into the gray-brown locks. Thick eyebrows bunched together as the man saw Legolas. "Oh, hello," he said cheerfully. "I see you found Kurama." The elf glanced down at the kit, then back at the old man. "Is he yours?" "No, no," the man said. "He's just one of the creatures of the forest." He peered around Legolas and spotted Fael. Instantly his mood changed, his eyes growing wide. "What happened?" "He fell into the river," Legolas said shortly. "I rescued him. His name is Fael." The strange man bustled forward, crouching down next to the elf. "Fael, Fael. I've heard that name." He put a hand to the unconscious elf's forehead, muttering softly in a language Legolas recognized as magical. The elf stiffened. "He's one of the Istari." "Radagast the Brown?" The man, wizard, finished his incantation, and Fael coughed, water spewing from his mouth as it exited his lungs. The elf gasped, breathing deeply, before settling into a deep sleep. "He'll be fine now," Radagast said happily. Same spell I used when Spinky fell into the river. He rose to his feet, adjusting his hat, before looking at Legolas. I am called Radagast the Brown, the wizard introduced, confirming what Legolas already knew. And you are? Esgal. Radagast nodded, sensing no lie, and clucked his tongue at Kurama. The fox kit leapt out of Legolas's arms, jumping up onto the wizard's shoulder. Radagast peered up at the still raining sky, frowning. We haven't had rain like this in over 500 years. Half of the forest is flooded. He glanced at the elf and nodded to Fael. Carry your friend. You might as well stay with me until the rain stops. He's not my friend, Legolas said as he picked the silver-haired elf up. Radagast rose an eyebrow at him as he walked through the mud. Then why did you save him? Because I could. I was not about to let him die, Legolas said at last. The wizard looked at him closely, suddenly halting in his tracks. You are an elf, he stated. Yes, the elf said warily. You do not glow. Yes. Suddenly, Radagast seemed older, wiser, and more dangerous. The other elves do not know you are here. Legolas tensed. That is correct. The wizard stared at him with piercing eyes, unblinking. The assassin looked back at him, chin jerking up defensively. Then Radagast relaxed, and the eccentric animal lover was back. All right then, quick, this way. Legolas followed the wizard through an erratic path only the brown-cloaked man could see, winding through the trees as they grew slowly darker. The elf grimaced slightly as the shadowed trees hissed at the elf he carried. The assassin shushed them in return, patiently asking them to leave the too bright elf alone. They listened, albeit grudgingly, refraining from lashing out at Fael. Legolas frowned as spider webs began to appear around them. Surely Radagast did not live so close to a spider's lair. The spiders don't bother me, the wizard said, answering his unasked question. I live here because I am trying to heal the animals and trees. Many die from the sickness that the shadow brings. I try to use my magic to heal them, but it is not enough. Legolas glanced at him, saddened by the grief in the odd wizard's eyes. It is a wonderful thing that you are doing for the forest. Radagast gave him a small smile. Yes, I try. I'm not as powerful as Saruman, or as brave as Gandalf, but I do try. I'm only capable of doing little things. I can't rally armies and defeat hordes of orcs, but I can heal sick animals and assist wounded elves. He gave Fael a searching look before perking up. Here we are. Radagast's home was carved into a large tree. Pieces of wood representing a roof and sides attached to a giant trunk to represent an odd shack. Legolas entered the house after the wizard, lips twitching at the sight of the variety of animals that were scattered throughout the small space. Set him down here, Radagast said, shooing a couple rabbits off of the bed. Seeing no animal droppings on the space, Legolas set the sleeping elf on the worn mattress. Sit, sit, Radagast urged, gesturing to a chair. I'm afraid that I don't have anything to eat or drink right now. He picked up a jar and shook it, its contents rattling. Well, unless you like birdseed. Legolas laughed softly. I'll pass, thank you. He looked around the tiny hut, noting the staff up against the wall and the odd assortment of objects lined up on shelves on the wall. Everything was slightly unkept, just like their owner. Legolas recognized a variety of animal food, along with several herbs that could be used to heal furry creatures. You really do care about the forest, he murmured softly. But if you don't mind me asking, what about your mission? To help defeat Sauron, you mean? Radagast sighed, settling down in a chair. Immediately his lap was occupied by 2 squirrels, a hedgehog, Kurama, the fox kit, and a skunk. The wizard petted the skunk absent-mindedly, eyes blank and distant. "I know that I am failing in my mission," he murmured, "but I am in love with the forests of Middle-earth, and cannot bring myself to leave." He turned to look at Legolas with serious eyes. "What about you? What is your purpose here?" "I want to help fight the shadow here," Legolas admitted. "I hunt orcs and spiders that the other elves miss or dare not." Radagast hummed vaguely. "Why don't you want your kin to know about you? They would be very grateful if they knew about their secret guardian." The assassin looked at him, his violet eyes glowing in the gloom. "You are accepting. They might not be. I am an elf that does not glow, can speak to shadowed trees, and has training they might find questionable. I'm not like other elves." "You fear rejection," Radagast said wisely. "You fear that no matter what you do, they will not accept you, and might even fear you." He hesitated a moment before continuing. "I cannot honestly say that the elves would welcome you with open arms. A tragedy has made them wary of strangers." His eyes grew sad. "The king's youngest son died, and his heart has grown cold. For now, it might be better if you continued to protect them from the shadows. They are not ready for you now." The grief in his voice was so potent that Legolas found himself wondering if Radagast was choosing to avoid the Mirkwood elves as well, or if he had seen a stranger be rejected. If the former was the case, then the wizard was rather brave for letting Fael into his home. If it was the latter, perhaps it was best to remain hidden and anonymous. With this in mind, Legolas rose from his seat. "Perhaps I should be going now, before Fael wakes." Radagast glanced at the sleeping elf, eyes widening. "I believe that is wise. Fael is one of the king's sons. Do not worry, Esgul. I will not tell him your name." "Thank you," Legolas said softly, and exited the house. It was still pouring, and Legolas grimaced as he headed through the rain once more. At least this section of Mirkwood was not flooded. He looked around, trying to figure out where he was. His eyes rested on a dark shape in the distance, visible above the trees. The assassin scowled at the dark fortress. It made him uncomfortable that Radagast lived within seeing distance of Dol Guldur, but that was the wizard's choice. The elf climbed up a tree, careful to keep his balance, and squinted through the pouring rain. The sight of more churning water caught his eye, and the elf could not stop a smirk from forming on his lips. He felt a thrill of bitter triumph and allowed himself to relish in it as he stood in the rain. With nimble movements he descended, deciding to wait out the storm beneath the thick covering of trees that was half a mile away. The forest was not the only thing that was flooded. Anger, confusion, annoyance, rage. These were the emotions it felt as its fortress, its home, was flooded with water. If it could, the darkness would have snarled and lashed out at the water that invaded Dol Guldur, but not even it could fight nature. And so the darkness merely seethed, its own anger heightened by the rage of its master. The darkness knew why its master and its kin were angry. Many orcs had drowned in the flash flood that had overcome the fortress. 56 orcs had died. The darkness knew this because it could sense everything in the Hill of Sorcery, and through it, its master could as well. The darkness had once been small and harmless, unable to give invaders anything more than a slight feeling of unease for many years. Then, its master had come, and through his darkness, the darkness had grown in strength, gaining a consciousness once more. Its master did not truly understand that, but the darkness did not care. It did not care what its master did, as long as he did not leave. It remembered what had happened the last time its master had left it. It had been stunned and wounded, feeling like a flesh whose limb had been torn off. It had been stunned and wounded, feeling like a fleshling whose limb had been torn off. It had sunk into shock, its power falling. Because of that shock and weakness, the darkness had unintentionally affected the evil creatures within Dol Guldur. It had slowed their minds and weakened their wits, letting the two lights that had somehow hidden from it kill them and escape. It had remained in shock until its master had returned, the limb reattaching to the body. The darkness had relied too heavily on its master's presence, and still relied upon it. It was too late for the darkness to break away and survive without a dark master to keep it conscious. It was not capable of sustaining itself anymore. Like an addict, it had drunk in the darkness of its master's aura until it could not remain functional on its own. It hated and loved its master because of this. But now it was mostly feeling hate. It could hear its master talking with one of his kin. Its master was leaving again, this time permanently. He was moving to a place called Minas Morgul, leaving his second-in-command Ringwraith in charge of Dol Guldur. The darkness was not pleased. It refused to be left alone. So, when the Witch King mounted on his dragon-like steed, uncaring about the storm that could not harm him, a large part of the darkness wrapped around its master. It would go with him to his new home. It would not be without its master. It would not be left behind again.